Go to our next speaker, I want to introduce Rosa Maria Paya. Rosa Maria Paya received our Morris B. Abram Human Rights Award recently for advocating for Cuban democracy, both through local efforts in Cuba and international initiatives. She is the leader of Cuba Decide, a nonpartisan group which calls for a binding national referendum on the question of holding free democratic elections in Cuba. Under her leadership, the group campaigned during municipal elections in 2017 for voters to annul their ballots to protest the lack of free and fair elections. Following the campaign, more than 30% of voters annulled their ballots at sites that the group monitored throughout the country. Beyond her efforts on the ground in Cuba, Rosa Maria Paya is a leading voice advocating for international pressure on Cuba, has raised the issue through passionate appeals at the UN Human Rights Council, the European Parliament, the US Congress, the Organization of American States, the Summit of the Americas, and national parliaments. There's so much more to say about Rosa, but I'm going to stop there and invite Rosa to tell us what she thinks about Cuba's candidacy to be elected to the UN Human Rights Council. Please unmute yourself, Rosa, so that you can speak. There should be a button on the bottom left of your screen to click unmute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Hillel, and greetings to all of you. A special thanks to you and WASH for providing this opportunity. In 2013, Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General in that moment, received and circulated a petition to create an international committee in order to conduct an independent investigation into the killing of a Cuban political activist, Osvaldo Paya Sardiñas. Next, July 22nd will mark 9 years since my father, Osvaldo Paya, was assassinated by the Cuban communist regime. The investigation is yet to be conducted by the UN, and the Cuban regime is again seeking a seat in the Human Rights Council, from where they pretend to protect their impunity, making sure that the multiple accusations against them or against the rest of the criminal friends of their criminal friends in Venezuela, China, Russia, or Belarus, etc., do not prosper. We know that for a fact, because that impunity has been guaranteed before, each time the Cuban regime has been seated in the council. I personally have been publicly interrupted, attacked, and even threatened by the ambassadors of the dictatorship in coordination with representatives of other regimes, such as the Russian, the Chinese, or the Venezuelan, while addressing the plenary session of the Human Rights Council. All these regimes act in gangs, conspiring together to cover their backs and empty the mission of the Human Rights Council of content and effectiveness. The existence of a candidacy without competition of the Cuban dictatorship is already an outrage against the Cuban people. But it is also a shame on the governments that sits in the United Nations. So my words today are especially addressed to the member states of the European Union and the democracies of the Americas, which should not legitimize their vote, which should not legitimize with their vote the presence in the Human Rights Council of the longest dictatorship in our hemisphere. We urge you to vote against the Cuban dictatorship for the highest human rights body. Actually, the 60-year tolerance towards totalitarianism in Cuba, demonstrated by the free war, has impeded the stability of democracy in our continent and caused serious threats to the national security of several states. As has been widely documented, the Cuban intelligence apparatus of the Castro regime infiltrated the entire hemisphere, from social movements to guerrillas and also criminal organizations. During these years, Cuba has served as a center for the dissemination of authoritarian models, such as the so-called 21st century socialism. The Cuban dictators are involved in criminal and terrorist-related activities, drug trafficking, trafficking in persons through the communist medical brigades, corruption, and also providing sanctuary and support to terrorists, as it was recently denounced by the Colombian government. In fact, last year, the attacks on democratic regimes in Latin America have been especially intense and even violent, according to the allegations of the OAS General Secretariat. That entity was forced to make itself available to, and I'm quoting, the member states in their efforts to confront the destabilizing actions organized by Venezuelan and Cuban dictatorships. So solidarity is crucial now, not just because of the interference of the Cuban regime in Latin America, but because Cuba is in crisis. Families are living through a deep humanitarian crisis and also the growing political repression. A crisis caused by the existence of a corrupt and criminal regime and now aggravated by the impact of the COVID-19. However, amid hunger and medicine shortages, the Cuban regime authorities have been blocking the release of humanitarian aid sent by the Cuban exile community in a citizen-led initiative to help their brothers and sisters in the island. For months now, Castro and Díaz-Canel have been arbitrarily withholding the cargo, demonstrating that the dictatorship is the true blockade between the aid and the Cuban people. We are talking about a regime that imposed a single-party system and prohibit the exercise of politics, the exercise of freedom of expression and association, and even of religious freedoms. All the democracies of the world, especially those that sit in the OAS and in the European Union, must vote against the Cuban dictators. Actually, Josep Borrell and Michelle Bachelet must publicly protest against this candidacy. To do otherwise would be an act of complicity with the criminals. It would be an act of treason to the Cuban people. And frankly, it would be a sabotage of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. It is imperative that all the nations in the free world support the Cuban fights for change, because the victory of the democracy in Cuba is essential to open the path to peace, prosperity, and stability in the whole world.